So one of the things we know about college football recruiting is that there are highs and there are lows. And up to this point, USC has had a lot of highs whenever we look at what they've been able to do on the recruiting trail. But this week, they experienced some lows, losing two five-star guys, one in Isaiah Gibson, the other in Justice Terry. And today, we have got to sit down, ask, and answer the question, what's going on at USC? But before we can, as always, I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes, N for no. Do you believe this is an important year for the Trojans in terms of getting them back up to the team they want to be? Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. We are less than 300 subscribers away from our milestone of 22,000 subscribers. I'd love to have you a part of the channel and the community. Plus, if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. Let's talk about this because USC had two big-time decommitments this week. One for a top 10 player in all of high school football, Justice Terry, out the state of Georgia, who, if we look at the 24/7 Sports Composite, ranks as the number 7 player in the nation, the number 2 defensive lineman, and the number 2 player in the state of Georgia. And USC had done a fantastic job at getting some big-time recruiting wins. And though they still have some great coaches on this staff, one of the things I've talked about is that I love some of the hires that the Trojans made in the offseason for that defensive staff. I think they have done a great job assembling some talent there. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video and how that may be a bit of a double-edged sword. But it was proving to be fruitful on the recruiting trail, getting these wins. But this week, two big-time decommitments happened. So what does this mean for the Trojans? And let me be very clear here, because I've seen some people on social media try and downplay these losses and say, oh, well, it's fine. We have elite guys already on campus. I don't disagree. I think you have some very talented guys. I think that you need to put it all together, but that doesn't discount that these are losses. You can't look at losing a Justice Terry and Isaiah Gibson, two of the top players in all of high school football, two top 50 guys on every recruiting service, and not think that's a loss. It is. It is. Now, the question is, has Lincoln Riley built USC recruiting in a manner to be able to sustain those losses? And while many would want to answer yes, this is where we have to get into a conversation, and that's about this year being massive for USC, especially if they want to become the brand once again that so many people remember them being. When I was a child, I remember USC as being at the top of college football, but it's been a while since that happened. And unfortunately for USC fans, for a lot of these kids, they don't even remember those days. They're too young. They don't remember those days. Now, for those of us old enough, we remember those days. We remember Pete Carroll there. We remember what those teams looked like. We remember how elite they were. But we are at a point now where recruiting off of past results, that's not going to get it done. And yes, we are in the NIL era. So you're able to attract prospects with NIL, lucrative deals, both in terms of what they can get now and in terms of what your university can provide. And whenever you are in LA, there's no shortage of businesses and NIL opportunities out there. But at the same time, we fall back on this conversation about why this year is so massive. Because unfortunately for USC, you have other teams out there that have massive brand capital, and they're not only able to play the brand capital game, they're not only able to play the NIL game, but they can point to the development that they have seen year after year, sending these kids to the NFL and say, hey, come here, you can still get your NIL, we're still a premier team in college football, but we're sending guys to the NFL year after year, and a lot of them. Whenever you're talking about these top guys in high school football, yes, NIL is big, but relationships and development, that's king. And whenever we look at USC, you're not in a position to be able to flex those same assets that some of these other universities have. Not assets in terms of name, image, and likeness capability, assets in terms of development. Now, yes, I understand. You brought in an elite staff. I have admitted as much on the defensive side of the ball. I agree with you. But it's one thing to recruit off of a promise of saying, hey, this staff can get it done. You just wait and see. It's an entirely different thing to say, you don't have to wait and see. Go to the 2024 draft. Go to the 2023 draft. Go to the 2022 draft and look at all the guys we're sending. I want you to imagine you're applying for a job and both jobs have a job training you have to do. Are you going to go to the one that looks hopeful and they're saying, oh, well, we believe we're going to be able to turn around this job training facility to be able to compete with the big dogs? Or are you going to go to the one that says, well, we don't have to hope. We just sent a bunch of guys to the field you want to go to this year, the past year, the year before that, and it's going to continue. Whenever you look at it through that lens, it becomes easier to understand why some of the teams that have been on top continue to be on top in terms of recruiting. So now we focus in and have the conversation. What does USC have to do? Well, unfortunately for Lincoln Riley, you have got to shore up the one area on your team you have never been able to get right. And that's the defensive side of the ball. And unfortunately, you have to shore it up whenever you don't have Caleb Williams. Now, that being said, I like Miller Moss. For the USC fans that aren't new to the channel, you might not agree with me, but I think one thing we could all agree with, I have been fair. Even when I have takes that you have commented and disagreed with, whenever we look back, a lot of those takes were right, and if I wasn't 100% right, I had shades of logic in there that was correct. I only bring that to your attention to say, even if you disagree with me right now, hear me out. Because I'm not saying this out of a position of being biased against Lincoln Riley, of being biased against USC. I have no bias here. I'm here to talk football. And those of you that have been around the channel from USC fans' perspective, I think you would at least meet me in the middle and say, even if you don't agree with me, my analysis has been fair. Unfortunately for Lincoln Riley, you don't get to try and develop a defense, figure out how to do that in the Pac-12 anymore. Now, once again, that's why you made all the great hires you did. Love the defensive staff they've assembled, top to bottom. I mean, I can go through the names. I think there's some really intriguing pieces. There's one name in particular that, dare I say, puts pressure on Lincoln Riley. We'll talk about that. But you're going to the Big Ten, which is a much more physical brand of football. And I'm not here to have the conversation about conference superiority, but one thing we can all acknowledge, if we're being honest with ourselves, is that the conferences do have a little bit different style of play. And some are closer to the others. Like if I was to say the conferences that were closer in the style of play, the Big 12 and the Pac-12 were always fairly close. Really creative offenses, really creative schemes. When I talk about the SEC and the Big 10, they're pretty close. Built on defense. Built on physicality. Now they've obviously had to adapt. They've had to adapt to be built on creative schemes as well, to be built on athleticism. The ability to have your athletes play in space, all that is true, but it is still a physical league is the Big Ten. You're going into that league, and your defense is still not where you need it to be. You don't have Caleb Williams. Once again, love Miller Moss. You have Branch, who I think is poised to be a superstar in college football. You got talented pieces on offense. That's not the issue. You're now going to be forced to play defense. And I understand that Rome wasn't built in a day. But here's the unfortunate reality, ladies and gentlemen. You're going into a conference where Ohio State is already ahead of you in terms of being ready now. Michigan already ahead of you in terms of being ready now. Dare I say Oregon already ahead of you in terms of being ready now. And we'll see what you do against a Penn State. Some of those other teams. But if USC goes to the Big Ten and they finish 4th, or even worse, 5th in the Big Ten, that's not going to help your bottom line in recruiting. That is going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on Lincoln Riley. And I believe, and I could be wrong here, you are free to disagree with me. Once again, my job here isn't to be agreed with. My job is to be understood. If I make a principled argument, you leave this video saying, hey, I disagreed with Ty, but I understood how he got from point A to point B and it logically made sense and it made you think about something, I've done my job. I've done my job. In my opinion, that's what communication is. It's not to be agreed with, it's to be understood. USC made a hire this offseason. It made me raise my eyebrows, both in terms of thinking to myself, that's a great hire. That's a great hire. But also in terms of, that's an interesting hire. You're going to the Big Ten. It's a different brand of football. Lincoln Riley has proved to consistently be a great quarterback coach, a great offensive coach, but his teams consistently lack physicality. Something we saw at Oklahoma. I mean, they would do great in the Big 12, and then when they played the big boys, they would get ran out the gym. But you hire Matt Entz. You hire Matt Entz, who was an elite coach at North Dakota State. I mean, has results to back it up. In my opinion, while that is a fantastic hire, it also puts pressure on Lincoln Riley. Because if he can't get it done, and if you end up 5th in the Big Ten, dare I say you have a coach in waiting already right there. A guy who understands defensive football. And you've laid the foundations to be successful on offense. You haven't laid the foundations to be successful on defense. You got a guy right there that knows what that looks like. Let's be very honest right now. We started this video talking about losing these two prospects, and the reason why we've ended up here is because unless you give these kids a reason to believe in your university, it's very difficult to sell on hope. Now, selling on hope by itself, if you were just in a vacuum, might not be the most difficult thing, but whenever you look across the aisle and you have Georgia, you have Bama, you have Ohio State, they don't have to sell on hope. And you can say Bama has a brand new coaching staff, but if we're talking about the defensive line, Roach is still there. Someone who's been a top recruiter in college football, someone who's sent several guys to the NFL. Georgia still has a lot of that staff together. Ohio State, Larry Johnson's still there. Larry Johnson is someone who I refer to as the godfather of defensive line coaching in college football. They don't have to sell on hope. These kids are looking at that brand right now, and they're brands that have been at or near the top of college football since they've been kids, since they've been younger. They don't have to sell on that same hope. Now, don't get me wrong, every bit of recruiting includes hope, but what they're selling is different. You have got to give these kids a reason to believe. Your coaching staff on defense is fantastic. I think Coach Henney was an amazing hire. Doug Belk, Lynn, Matt Entz. Love those hires. Absolutely love those hires. I do. And unfortunately for every single one of those guys, they have to go up against Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State. And every single one of those coaching staffs, they just turn to the 2024 draft. They turn to the 2023 draft. They turn to the 2022 draft and so on and say, this is what we do. This is what we do. And even if you want to make the argument, because I did give you Bama, that Nick Saban is no longer there, well, they hired Kalen DeBoer, who went to the Pac-12, much like Lincoln Riley did, got there at the same time. He inherited a 4-8 program, and you can say, oh, but he had Penix. Lincoln Riley had Caleb Williams. DeBoer gets there, inherits a 4-8 program, and is in the national championship game 2 years later, went 25-3. Lincoln Riley gets to the Pac, has a great year one, and year two, it's nowhere near the same. So yes, you can hit me with the argument, and it would be a logical, well-placed argument of Nick Saban's not there. Sure. But these kids have still seen Bama at the top, and Alabama just hired a coach that these kids watched inherit a Washington program that once again was 4-8. And after that 4-8 year before Kalen DeBoer got there. After that, he was 25-3, just played in the national championship game. That's exactly what I'm talking about. He's given these kids a reason to believe in him. Lincoln Riley has to give these kids a reason to believe. He's given quarterbacks a reason to believe. No doubt about it. Quarterback whisperer. He's given offensive players a reason to believe, but he has got to give these kids a reason to believe that the team will be successful. And until that happens, USC is still going to be scrambling to become the team all their fans know they can be and the team they once were. Hop down to the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.